Hello, this is Robert Rickover. I'm an Alexander Technique teacher in Omaha, Nebraska. And although I teach online these days, and my guest is Imogen Ragone, an Alexander Technique teacher in Wilmington, Delaware, who also teaches online. And Imogen's going to talk today about on the general topic, how does self-compassion relate to the Alexander technique? So I think the first two questions to ask you are first, what do you mean by self-compassion? And then what is the Alexander technique?
Okay, well, we'll start with self-compassion because I think most people have an idea of it and they probably think in very simple terms that it's, just being kind to yourself, looking after yourself, and that's great. But I've been reading the work of Kristin Neff, who you might say is a self-compassion expert. She's a professor at University of Texas, Austin, I think. I'm not sure. Don't have the book right by me, but she had written a work several years ago that was simply called Self-Compassion, which I read and enjoyed a lot. And recently, I've been reading her latest book, which is called Fierce Self-Compassion. There's a nice subtitle, which I don't have at my fingertips right now. But she really defines self-compassion through research as having three key elements.
Mhm.
And those elements are kindness, so that's the kind of self-kindness, mindfulness,
Mhm.
and common humanity, recognizing, you're human and part of the human, whatever's going on is not unique to you. Everybody experiences mistakes, problems, pains, everyone experiences suffering in some way, and we have that in common with the rest of humankind. And so these three elements are what together become self-compassion.
Okay, and I'm sort of guessing that the mindfulness part maybe is somewhat a lead into
Well, I think that's
Alexander
the
technique.
main element, although I can see how all three tie in. But I think, yes, the mindfulness piece is maybe the key place that Alexander technique can relate. So just very brief definition of Alexander technique is that it's a way of moving and being in the world with more ease in your body and in your mind. So
Right.
your whole self.
In order to actually uh, use the technique, you kind of have to have some mindfulness,
You do indeed.
like a
Um, so
prerequisite, I would say.
yes, so the
Yeah.
mindfulness piece is necessary because without awareness of what's going on, you can't bring yourself the kindness or the care or the actions that are needed to look after yourself, if you're not even aware of them, right? So
Mhm, mhm. Well,
um,
you could be a very kind person by nature. I'm just speculating here, but you could be a kind person, but if someone shows up, a friend of yours shows up with a really serious problem, you may not you may not know how to react to that. You may be sort of in a
oh,
you
that's
may just
true
not.
too. And everything that we say about self-compassion really is true for compassion, but we're very much
Oh,
more
I see. Yeah.
oriented on especially the book that Kristin Neff just wrote was especially targeted at women and using the
Okay.
power of self-compassion, because I think women especially are um, um, tend to just really take care of everyone and everything else much more than taking care of their own needs. I think it's culturally, society, the patriarchy,
Right.
all of that,
Right. Yeah.
and there's probably some, biological reasons as well, maybe.
Mhm. Right.
But uh, that's great, but not at the expense of your own well-being. And Alexander Technique is a super way of taking care of your own well-being in lots of ways,
Mhm.
and gives us this tool to even take care of ourselves kind of in the moment. We've talked in previous podcasts about how we can pause and how we can deliver specific thoughts that help us improve how we're experiencing our own function of our body, how we move, how much excess tension or not we have in our body, and
Right.
stuff like that. And that could be seen as definitely an act of self-care. And I think self-care and self-compassion go hand in hand. And yet my experience as a teacher of the Alexander Technique, and my experience myself when I first sought Alexander Technique, it was only when things got really bad that I
Oh,
went for
really? So
help.
you didn't see it as something for just everyday use?
I didn't, once I had learned the Alexander Technique,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
then I saw it as something for everyday use to enjoy. Yes, it's preventative, but it also helps me enjoy being in my body and doing the things I do. And it helps me be aware of when I'm getting tired and might need to take a little break before I get to the stage of being really exhausted, perhaps. It gives us more awareness. But before I had any Alexander experience, I was in really severe pain with my neck and was starting to try all sorts of things. But it got to the stage of feeling quite desperate to start seeking help for me. I was a young mother at the time, and
Right.
my focus was on looking after my child
Right.
predominantly. But it was interfering with my ability to look after my child. So at that point,
Right. Yeah. So the other thing, though, that's interesting, I mean, you point out that women tend to perhaps be less quick to exercise self-compassion because
yeah.
they're being compassionate to everyone around them.
Yeah.
But and it might seem like to look after yourself would sort of take you away from that external compassion.
Mm-hmm.
But really, if it doesn't, that's not the case at all, because it doesn't, it's something that you can use as you're doing or thinking or saying anything to anybody. You can also have a little subtle, soft thought that you can deliver to yourself. And it really only needs to be the softest of thoughts. We've just got through an interview talking
Mm-hmm.
about
Mm-hmm.
that. So it enables you to have to exercise some self-compassion without in any way sacrificing the external compassions, right?
Yeah,
And more so,
that's actually a really interesting way. I hadn't quite thought of it like that, but I think you're exactly right. I do have a nice quote here from Kristin Neff, because I think people can equate self-compassion or self-care as being selfish.
selfish, yeah, right,
Yes,
which it definitely is not.
not. And so she writes, we aren't when we're practicing self-compassion, she writes, we aren't selfish, but we don't subordinate our needs either. We respect everyone's desires, including our own. And I think that's really helpful. I also think, kind of in my own example that I just shared, that I had to look after myself to be able to look after my son adequately and, you know, take care of family life. At that
Right,
time I was as a young mother, that, you know,
so I would add to that, though, you needed to figure out a way to look after yourself. And the Alexander technique is certainly an excellent way to do that.
yeah,
But when you do that, you are also helping everyone around you, even with no
yeah,
intention on your part to,
yeah,
because, well, at the most basic level, you have a small child, you're holding the small child in your lap or your arms or whatever, right? So there's physical contact, and Alexander technique is pretty obvious in the Alexander technique that how you're using yourself is going to have a huge impact on someone that you're in close contact with.
yes, it will
Very transmissible that
change
way.
the way that your touch, the way
Touch?
you're holding your child will be received.
Right.
Will it feel more spacious and nurturing and encouraging, whatever it is, or will it be tense and anxious and we are communicating non-verbally all the time.
Right.
So if we're using Alexander to take care of ourselves in the moment, those, like you say, those even non-verbal signals that if you're in, you know, even across the internet,
Even
right?
across, certainly doesn't
You
require,
know,
touch is great, but it doesn't require that. It's
no,
just someone in the same room or on the same Zoom call,
on the same screen.
same
If
screen.
I'm like this,
I'm
I'm
not going to
sure that
like it.
feels
I'm
quite
going to get tense
different
and
to if
upset.
I'm taking care of myself.
Yeah.
But there's also ways to be with yourself when you are feeling angry and upset that are not repressing those feelings, but maybe helping you have a little bit more space between them. I think Alexander's a really great tool to help us be more in that observer role of ourselves.
Mhm.
And the mindfulness piece of self-compassion is that we need to be able to be aware of when we are suffering, and then we also have the tools to be able to meet that with you know, kindness, tenderness, or in a more motivating way. You might need to act in a ways that are to stand up for yourself, to protect, to provide. So I think that's an interesting aspect. This is in her new work, because it's not simply, which isn't necessarily simple, to be more accepting of ourselves as we are. I actually also think Alexander's great for helping us learn to embrace mistakes and not being perfect as part of the process, and actually getting to enjoy them. And that, you know, usually people are not very good at being accepting of when they make a mistake. So there's
Right.
that
And
aspect of it too.
well, I would say using the Alexander technique is a bit of an exercise in experimentation.
Yes.
And with any true experiment, there can be
Then
no mistakes, because
exactly.
let's do this and see what happens, and do this and see what happens. So the idea of making a mistake kind of fades away.
Yeah. And I think you can then start to relate that to other aspects of your life,
Right.
which is helpful. And I do think in Alexander that it relates to the mistakes, having this very kind of accepting and non-judgmental attitude toward yourself is helpful. In one of our previous interviews, we were talking about how we aim to deliver a thought and not try and make anything happen from doing that. It's called either directing or constructive thinking.
Right.
That's part of the Alexander Technique process.
Right.
And it's very easy to not do that. It sounds simple. It's very easy to try and help or it not have the result we want. And I think this learning to get out of our own way in this very gentle, non-judgmental, accepting ways, like, oh yeah, I did help a little bit then. It relates to this.
Well, and to me, it, I mean, I tend, maybe because I'm an old-fashioned male, I don't really think about self-compassion a lot, but it seems to me that when I think about it, Alexander Technique is definitely a form of self-help, which could be morphed into self-compassion.
Yeah, I think just maybe one final thing to say is that a lot of us, our kind of internal dialogue with ourselves is not usually maybe so friendly. We tend to internally berate ourselves for doing something wrong, and we can be quite harsh and brutal in a way that we would never be to a friend, and that's where the mindfulness can also come in, that Alexander can provide beautifully, because we not only are observers of our own physical self, we are observers of what's going on in our mind, and that we can notice that we're doing that, and we can make a different choice. And we can also meet that with not, because then you can get in this cycle of then berating yourself and berating yourself, and is that a kind of a familiar thing to you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
so,
Yeah. Well, is there anything else you want to say on this topic?
Well, just one thing more related to that in a dialogue is I've lost my thought. I'm sorry. And I'm going to meet that with self-compassion, and not beat myself up for that. But I do want to mention that I've got really, really interested in this whole topic, and in this book, which I would highly recommend, Fierce Self-Compassion by Kristin Neff. She includes some physical gestures and ways to use supportive or soothing touch, which have been really interesting to explore. And I'm doing a exploratory workshop online on Wednesday that will be June 22nd, for anyone interested, called Embodying Self-Compassion, where we'll actually go through some explorations in a more orderly fashion.
Hey, yeah. Okay, well, my guest today has been Imogen Ragone, an Alexander teacher in Wilmington, Delaware. And I maybe, Imogen, you could send me some text to go with the video and the podcast that'll include mentioning of that book. And
sure.
Anything else you want to put in there. Thank you so much for being on the show, I guess we could say today.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you.